All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight virtually in welcoming prose poet Jose Hernandez Diaz to Washington State University. We are grateful for your attendance this evening and encourage you to type in the chat which campus or what area you're tuning in from this evening. My name is Maya Alger, and I am an intern for the Washington State University Visiting Writers Series. Currently, I'm on the WSU Pullman campus. Washington State University is located on the homelands of the Nimiipuu and the traditional homeland of the Palouse Band of Indigenous people. We acknowledge their presence here since time immemorial and recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. Tonight's event is only possible through the Coug community that continues to persevere, a partnership between the WSU Pullman and Vancouver English departments, WSU's College of Arts and Sciences, Landescapes, Native American programs, WSU Vancouver's Council on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, Academic Outreach and Innovation, ASWSU, and WSU's Common Reading Program. Additionally, I would like to thank our VWS co-directors, Cameron McGill and Julian Ankney. Thank you for making time to be here with us tonight. Our common reading book this year is Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweet Grass, which reflects upon modern-day botany as well as environmentalism through the perspective of Indigenous people of North America. Kimmerer often offers a perspective of how we can face the status of our environment and what challenges stem from that. We're excited to welcome Robin Wall Kimmerer on our next virtual event, which has been rescheduled and is hosted by the WSU Common Reading Program to Tuesday, February 21st at 6 p.m. For more information on this and future events, please visit the WSU Visiting Writers Series page that is posted on the English Department's website. Again, you are encouraged to utilize the YouTube chat to engage and respond throughout the evening. Afterwards, there will be a short Q&A panel. Without further ado, I will now welcome Visiting Writers Series co-director Julian Ankney.
Catsy out, yow, Maya. Thank you. It is really my pleasure to introduce to you tonight Jose Hernandez Diaz. He is a 2017 NEA Poetry Fellow. He holds degrees in English and creative writing from the University of California, Berkeley, and Antioch University, Los Angeles. He is the author of a collection of prose poems, The Fire Eater, Texas Review Press 2020, and the forthcoming collection, Bad Mexican, Bad American, from Acre Books 2024. He has been published in the American Poetry Review, Colorado Review, Huzache, Iowa Review, the Missouri Review, the National Poetry, the Southern Review, Yale Review, and in the Best American Non-Required Reading. He teaches creative writing online for Beyond Baroque, Hugo House, Lighthouse Writers Workshop, Litero Magazine, and elsewhere. I actually had the pleasure of taking one of Jose's surreal poetry workshops this last month, and it was the first time in about 5 months and over 5 months that I had written any poetry myself. He's brilliant, y'all, and that's what it takes to be a creative writing teacher. And that's exactly what he is. You have to inspire your students. So thank you, Jose, for that inspiration. So please welcome poet Jose Hernandez Diaz to the Washington State University Visiting Writers Series. Katsi Yao Yao Oikalo. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. Thank you, Maya, Cameron, Rob and Brian and Julian, of course, for the invite. It's an honor to be here. I grew up watching a lot of Pac-12, Pac-10 sports, so I was always rooting against WSU. So it's nice to be here as a guest and a privilege and an honor as well. I'm coming here from Southern California, Southeast LA County. I'm going to go ahead and get started with some new poems. Then I'll jump into 3 of my collections. The first poem I'm going to read is called Autumnal Heart. I woke up asleep and discovered it was autumn inside my heart. Not that I anymore. It ran away with a beautiful stripper. My once present heart was too sensitive for this world anyway. I'm glad it's gone, turned into red leaves, yellow leaves, brown leaves. My faded heart was like an autumn pumpkin, waiting for someone to carve a face on it. I place what is left of my jack-o'-lantern heart in front of my house for Halloween. It scares the neighbors and mail carriers. Monster goal that it's always been. So if you don't follow me on Twitter, I post a lot on Twitter, a lot of submission opportunities for writers. A few weeks ago, there was sort of a prompt, if you will, about starting off a tweet with "Hey," and then just getting really weird with it. And I wrote a series of poems to that. This first one is called "Hey," and it was published in a Broken Lens journal. Hey, with the intention of going to an independent bookstore with you, both of us fed up with the machinery of capitalism, consumption, the greed. Hey, with the intention of filling the void with your smile, your laugh, your kiss beneath the autumn moon. Hey, with the intention of moving to Montana with you, writing and painting, inspired by the muse of the mundane, living a minimalist lifestyle until they grant us both MacArthur grants and we can afford to fly away to the moon. I write a lot about family. I'm a first generation Mexican American. This next poem is an ode to my abuelita, and it's called Abuelita. Para mi abuelita, Amalia Guzman. My abuelita is visiting from Mexico. When the sun goes down and it starts to get dark out, she always says, "Está oscuro como la boca de un lobo," dark like a mouth, dark like a wolf's mouth. She's getting older now, 90 years old. She can't really cook for herself anymore. I try to help as much as I can. She's the best. Yesterday, my brother asked her where she was born, Guanajuato or Michoacan. She said Michoacan. She said the last time she went to the rancho where she was born was a couple of years ago, but she didn't have a good time because it rained and rained. I think maybe they are tears from the sky, tears or rain of celebration for her return. But I wouldn't say such a sentimental thing to her face because she's been hardened by life as an orphan, then getting married, and my abuelo dies in his 40s, having to raise 11 kids on her own. No, I don't say anything, but I picture her at her childhood home, sitting on the porch, watching the rainfall, wishing her comadres would come by, most of them dead now. Then one of them would say, "Hola, ¿cómo estás, doña Amalia? Tantos años han pasado." So for this next prose poem I'm going to read, it was published in Chicago Quarterly Review. And as Julian mentioned, I do a lot of workshops, and I write prompts for these workshops. And the prompt for this prose poem was write about being abandoned. So the prose poem that came out is called "The Idealist." I was abandoned by the army because I believed in the power of flowers to devour our enemies. They called me crazy, said I was an idealist and a dreamer. They abandoned me in the middle of the jungle, not far from the enemy. I began my trek toward the distant coast. I survived on fresh oxalis and snails. For a second, I played dead to avoid a large leopard. I darted around like a fugitive ballerina. I pirouetted with the breeze of the setting sun. When I finally arrived at the ocean, I knelt to my inner compass and thanked the ancient earth. Tomorrow, I'd build a raft and sail away to freedom. So yeah, one thing that I always admired about Washington State is that, they didn't always have the most talent in football, but they always put up a good fight. anytime you play WSU, from the Southern California perspective, we had all the talent in our backyard and everything, but we knew that it was going to be a tough fight. And WSU definitely had USC and UCLA's number plenty of times. So just thought I would throw that in there. This next prose poem is called Coyote. I was looking at photographs of my childhood, and there beside me in every picture was a wild coyote. I don't remember having a wild coyote as a pet as a child. A coyote would have frankly killed a child, is what puzzles me. But there it was in every childhood memory. Apparently, the wild coyote and I played on the swings together during recess. We shot hoops together as the sun set on summer days. The coyote even attended my first communion. The coyote always had my back, it turns out, and here I am denying its existence. At least I'll always have these old Polaroid photographs. See you in the next life, dear coyote. This next prose poem is forthcoming in Bennington Review, and I think out of all the magazines that I've published in, Bennington Review I've been in most often. I think I've been in there or I'm forthcoming in about 4 or 5 issues. The anniversary. The anniversary of my death was last Tuesday. I died in a fiery plane crash. I was not a soldier in a heroic war, but an adventurist. I discovered many lands. Most of the lands were imaginary, like a dream. One country I founded was called the land of utter emptiness. It was full of empty wine glasses and cigarette butts. On Sunday, I went to the doctor to check on my health. He said I was, in fact, already dead. Furthermore, it was the anniversary of my death, just last Tuesday. I tried having an order here for these poems, but I like to just mix it up, keep it fresh. This next one is called The Art of Bullfighting, and it's one of the few relationship or love lost poems that I've written. And it's also one of my earlier pieces, probably like 11 years old, 12 years old. And I went back and edited it, and it was published in Airlight from USC, The Art of Bullfighting. This is me letting you go, float away, beyond the misty shoreline, beyond the fading sunset. Finally, you have exited the dizzying tunnels in my mind. No longer will I compare you to an out-of-reach rose. The petals have died, in spite of my open palms, in spite of the relative calm. Finally, we are free to flee, to return to the masquerade, looking for the art in bullfighting. We are wrist deep in blood. This next poem, prose poem, was published in the Yale, was published in the Yale Review as Poem of the Week. And at the end of the year, I found out that it was one of the top 10 poems, most read poems on Yale online, Yale Review online, right up next to Diane Seuss, who was one of my favorite poets. So that was amazing. The Stranger. A man came up to me as I was walking home from the pharmacy. Are you Jose Hernandez Diaz? Yes, I said. Who's asking? Do you enjoy sipping tea before bedtime? Well, I do, but what is it to you? I asked. In the 9th grade, did you get cut from the basketball team? I did, in fact, get cut from the team. Do you sometimes wonder what life would have been like had you married Margot Cisneros? Maybe sometimes, yes, I said. Are you afraid of small talk and long walks in the city? I'm just a little introverted, I said. Does the night sky resemble a dragon of your dreams? Yes, thank you for asking, I said. Did you cry when Muncy hit that home run in the World Series? I think it was like the 18th inning at that point. I did cry at that moment, proud of it. Were you born and raised back and forth from LA and Orange County? Story of my life, yes, I said. Does the night sky resemble a dragon of your dreams? Yes, thank you for asking. Yes. I've never been to the Pacific Northwest, but I will be in Seattle next month. I have like 4 readings lined up, so I'm excited about that. Can't wait to see everybody in person. This next prose poem was written when my Twitter got hijacked by a bot apparently, and it's called "Kafka Was Being Serious." I woke up and logged onto Twitter to discover someone impersonating me. They said I like to read novels in the bathtub, but I don't have the attention span for that. And besides, I only take showers. They posted things with swagger and confidence instead of second guessing and qualifying every thought like I do. They created another personality for me, one who doesn't feel guilty about going to Starbucks, Amazon, or the corporate chains, a carefree everyman, you could say. When I reported this to Twitter support, they said I was the actual fraud, that my name doesn't match my ID card. I told them that's because it's my pen name and my mother's maiden name as well. They told me to take a hike and get a real job because writing is a form of criminality. I now wander the damp streets looking for my past self, the one with 20K followers and a sense of purpose. Follow me, dear friends, beneath the scattered moonlight. I'm craving Starbucks again, but the real me actually feels guilty about it. And I'm actually drinking Starbucks now. I just realized this was not intentional. Can't really avoid it, I guess. This next prose poem, people have asked me, a lot of your prose poems, they're about men, man in the Pink Floyd shirt, a man in the Chicano Batman shirt, a man in a Rage Against the Machine shirt. A lot of my favorite bands growing up or present day, the man in an MF Doom shirt. So a lot of masculine bands, right? So I tried to write a prose poem about a woman, and this is what came out. The woman with flowers in her hair. There was a woman who was born with flowers in her hair. When she was a baby, they were tiny pink roses. As she grew, more diverse flowers sprouted in her hair. Dahlias, dandelions, lilacs. The woman with flowers in her hair could not go anywhere without unwanted attention, glares. The townspeople called her Flower Woman. She cried at night, tears of loneliness. One day, the woman noticed a pink rose falling from her hair. The next day, an orchid fell. By the end of the year, the woman no longer had any flowers in her hair. She was overjoyed. She danced for days. She found a boyfriend. He turned into a husband. They started a family. She was ecstatic. But it didn't last. She thought she would completely adore freedom, the sense of fitting in with the background. However, she couldn't deny it. She missed the flowers in her hair. She missed the colorful way she looked in the mirror. She missed the dahlias and the lilacs, the dandelions. Most of all, she missed the smell of flowers when it rained. And talking about the prompts I do with students, one of the prompts that I came up with was write about going on a date with one of your favorite artists. And the one that I picked was Frida Kahlo. So it's called My Date with Frida Kahlo. I went on a date with Frida Kahlo. Frida was like a mother to me, or a muse at least. So it was kind of awkward at first. She sure was beautiful though. She had on a colorful rebozo, and one of her monkeys sat on her shoulder the entire date. I didn't mind, of course, anything to sit next to Frida. In fact, I became close friends with the monkey. His name was El Jaguar. Anyway, Frida and I ate at an underground Mexico City cafe. It was where real artists hung out. I felt out of place, but then again, she invited me there, so maybe I belonged. Frida and I had Cuban coffee and vegetarian tacos. We sipped mezcal and black tea. At the end of the night, I tried to make a move on her. She feigned resistance at first, but then aggressively kissed me back. We kissed for 30 minutes beneath the protest mural by David Alfaro Siqueiros. She asked to paint me naked. I was too shy and refused. On the second date, she stood me up. I mourned for a couple of weeks and then moved on to my irrational pursuit of Rosario Castellanos. So yeah, it's an honor to be here. I remember when Natalie Diaz read here and Roger Reeves, and I was just like daydreaming about reading here one day, and it actually happened. So pretty excited about that. I remember reading both of them in graduate school and just being amazed by the intricate poems that they wrote and just profound work. So yeah, it's great to be here. This next one is another one of those Hey poems that I was talking about from a series I wrote. Hey, with the intention of abandoning the hierarchies of capitalism, the machinery of thought. Hey, with the desire of growing lilacs in our community garden, bougainvillea running along the wall. Hey, as we denounce the walls of isolation and marginalization, no to the elite, no to centuries of settler colonialism, their insistence we are immigrants on our own land. Hey, at midnight, beneath the candle of the moon, our arms interlocked like laurels painted onto the rims of Renaissance paintings. Hey, I miss you. I never even met you. Let's take a deep dive into each other's bookshelves until we find oceans of imagery, metaphors we can discuss, dissect, not for ego's sake, but for love. And this poem is actually forthcoming as a poem of the day, poem a day for poets.org, selected by Diane Seuss. So that was amazing when I got that email. I think her work is electric and iconoclastic and avant-garde and just everything that I admire in verse. So keep an eye out for that next month. This next poem, in Latin American culture, in many cultures, people, they try to lighten their skin, and the television news anchors are all light-skinned. When you go to Mexico, you see that a lot of the telenovela stars are light-skinned. So I said, why not write an ode to my brown skin? And it's called Ode to My Brown Skin. People assume I want to be lighter, never crossed my mind. I know I'm indigenous and strong, like my ancestors, proud and wise. Do not assume I will rob or murder you when I walk behind you in a parking lot late at night. Do not assume I'm a high school dropout or in gangs. Even though the Spanish channel prefers light-skinned actors, I'm not fooled by the shaky lens. Typically, Mexican families have instructed their children to marry lighter skinned folks, but I can see above the noise, above the hate we can't live without, the hate we love. Brown skin like pan dulce, brown skin like la tierra, brown skin like a tortilla, brown skin, ancient armor. I think that's the first time I read that one. Currently in the submission stage. And the next couple poems I'm going to read are from a series of odes. This next one is called Ode to Pan Dulce con Café. I don't get to eat you as much as I want, but when I do, I savor each bite like a religious ritual. The subtle sweetness, tenderness, the nostalgia of youth when mom would come from the store with many grocery bags. Traje pan dulce, she'd say. I'd rush to the table, coffee on the stove, pick up the puerquito and a pink concha. The pan like fine artisan work, reminders of youth, but also of the motherland, Mexico, where I've only been on vacation, but always felt like a second home. So this is also one of my prompts. I try to get writers to write odes to everyday objects, pan dulce con café, to a piñata, everyday images, objects, and make them bigger than life. This next one is called Ode to Boxing. And, initially I played football in high school. And when I wanted to be a writer after I finished my playing days, I thought I had to reject sports that I grew up watching. And I didn't think it was artistic. I thought it was just too violent and toxic, and which, there are elements of that as well, obviously. And so I rejected sports for a while. And then I started to get older and a little more balanced, less extreme, I guess you could say. And I started to use sports as last time, so that I wasn't always engaged in literature, teaching, editing. And it was a way to unwind, forget about problems or stress. And I also started watching a lot of boxing with my cousins, Mexican American. So on the weekends, we get together, watch boxing. And frankly, it's one of the few sports that there are Mexicans in. So we always appreciate that, other than soccer, I guess you could say. So this one got picked up by North American Review. Ode to Boxing. You're always there for me on the weekend when I need a good show, something to root for, with a beer in hand and the company of cousins shouting, cheering at the spectacle. I want to see a Mexican fighter showing bravery, skill, and a victory. I want to see myself reflected in brown men with Aztec tattoos and short fade haircuts like mine. Sure, it can get violent. The world is also violent. But there is plenty of technique which takes years to master, moving and sticking. These working class men come from backgrounds like mine, tough barrios like mine, with Spanish last names like mine. For now, Monday morning, the work week just beginning, watch my fancy footwork and jab as I swing like a hungry underdog, aiming for a title. So this next one, I did a lot of writing at the Cerritos Library at one point. And that day I had a poem accepted by the nation. And someone came up to me, a white lady came up to me and asked me where the trash was. and I was confused, and she thought I was a janitor there. So that's when I came up with this poem, Portrait of the Artist as a Brown Man, which is obviously paying homage to, who is it? The Irish writer, I forget his name right now, I'm blanking out. Joyce, obviously, Joyce, who wrote Portrait of the Artist as a young man. So this Portrait of the Artist as a Brown Man. A few years ago, I was in the same library, in the same quiet, upper middle class town I didn't live in. I just finished writing a prose poem that would eventually get published in The Nation, Writer's High. Then a white lady came up to me and asked about the trash. I was confused until I realized she thought I was a janitor because of my brown skin. So that's a short poem. I think that's the shortest poem I have. Excuse me. And I also have a manuscript with that title, Portrait of the Artist as a Brown Man, and it's currently being reviewed. So keep an ear out for that. And I also have a book coming out in early next year, Acre Books, University of Cincinnati Press, imprint, Bad Mexican, Bad American. And since The Fire Reader is a chapbook, a long chapbook, Bad Mexican, Bad American is technically my first full-length collection. This next poem is from Portrait of the Artist as a Brown Man manuscript, and it's called A Poem Where I Try to Make Sense Out of Diaspora and Assimilation. And it was picked up in 7:45. I've written plenty of poems about my parents' sacrifice for our family, but can there ever truly be enough? I always end up feeling ungrateful for being American, guilty for simply being happy or publishing a book where my folks didn't get such opportunities. Then again, I know this is why they came to this country, for me to thrive, for me to write this book, for me to read in front of a crowd of strangers. My folks aren't perfect, no one is. In fact, the first gen struggle often pits folks against each other. We've all heard the parable of the crabs in a barrel, right? Where a single crab tries to rise out of a bucket only to be pulled down by fellow crabs. We must remember not to be loaded weapons aimed at each other. It is easy to blame your brother when you're both starving. My goal is to eventually have my parents see their sacrifice as worth it, not just for the education, wealth, prosperity, but so they can see it wasn't at the expense of family unity. That one took a lot of editing, actually, to get it right where I wanted it to be. This next prose poem is part of those odes I was talking about, right? To everyday images, objects in our community, in our everyday lives. And it is called Ode to the Piñata. You're always there for me, dear Piñata. Every year you greet me when I need you the most, when I'm 1 year closer to death. You remind me to take a second and enjoy sweet dulces. You have a deep philosophy. Swing harder, eat candy. What utter wisdom. Sartre himself would be proud. Piñata, your colors are as majestic as a rainbow swaying in the summer sky. Sure, I'm fully grown and don't need you anymore, but you bring me happiness, and damn it, that's important. No, I don't really eat candy anymore, but a chocolate or two won't hurt. Besides, seeing my sobrinos run to get scattered dulces is worth any price or trouble. Maybe I will put a bouquet of carnations inside of you, sweet piñata. Maybe a dozen tacos de asada al pastor. All kidding aside, you've been in La Familia since the beginning, even before Los Abuelitos. I know you'll stick around till the end, when the merry world explodes like a spinning a piñata, always there for me. See, this is the one negative of going random, because random order, because I don't remember if I read this poem. I don't think I did. So I'm gonna read it. For context, my father is from Guanajuato, which is in central Mexico, where Las Mumias are from, the mummies, and where Diego Rivera is from. They're from a pueblo called Moroleon, Guanajuato. And growing up, my father would always say that Jorge Ramos, who is a prominent news person of Mexican descent on the Spanish channel, Spanish language channel, I should say, 34 in LA, channel 34. So my father would always claim that Jorge Ramos was from Guanajuato, even though he's from Mexico City. And obviously, you know, it gave him pride to say that. So this poem is called Jorge Ramos is from Guanajuato. Jorge Ramos is not from Guanajuato. Jorge Ramos is from Mexico City. My father insists he is from Guanajuato. My father is from Guanajuato. My father takes great pride in saying Jorge Ramos is from Guanajuato. I tell my father, Jorge Ramos is from Mexico City. He is not from Mexico City, my father says. He is from Serrano, Guanajuato. Why don't we Google it, I say. There's no point, my father says. Jorge Ramos is from Serrano, Guanajuato. Jorge Ramos is from Guanajuato. So for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to read from a couple of manuscripts that I have online here. This next poem is called Enough. And I wrote this when Mexico and the US played in soccer. And I didn't know who to root for, you know. I kind of go for Mexico just because they've traditionally been better, but either way, you know, I'm happy with the outcome. But I said I wanted to reflect this, you know, double consciousness, bicultural existence. And I wrote a poem called Enough. Enough. You will never be enough. Not Chicano enough. Not Pocho enough. Not Mexican enough. Not Latinx enough. Not American enough. Not Californian enough. Not Southern Californian enough. Not LA County enough. Not Orange County enough. Not enough of a whole entity. Not enough of a clear sky. Not enough of a bottle of tequila. Not enough of a slice of apple pie. But you are everything and nothing all at once. You are a modern mariachi on a tangled road. Be vigilant, exist. When I read that poem, I often get folks from different backgrounds, and Korean Americans and African Americans, and folks telling me that they can relate to that feeling of not feeling Mexican enough for certain people, not feeling American enough for certain people, and hence the name of my next book, Bad Mexican, Bad American. This next poem was written when I was at the Norwalk Library, Southeast LA County, and I was doing some work on the computer, and a bald-headed cholo came into the library with his face all tattered up. You could see the gangs he was from. And he walked in with his daughters, and he was helping them look for books. And I just thought it was a very beautiful scene. And I wrote this poem. It's called The Most Poetic Thing. At 6 a.m., I read Lorca's Poema del Canto Hondo. I take a photo of La Lola in the sunlight and post it on Facebook and Instagram. The talented poet, Dara Wire, likes it. That makes my day. Then I submit to a literary magazine and prepare for more submissions August 1st, when a few more journals open up. Also, I edit a prose poem about a dragon and a horse rider. In the evening, when I'm finishing up more work on the computer at the local library, an OG from the neighborhood with gang tattoos covering his body and face walks in the library with his daughters and helps them look for books. They tell him the names of the books, and he says, let's look for them alphabetically. I can't help but smile, as one of the toughest guys in the barrio is in the children's section of the library on his knees, looking for books with his kids. Much respect, though, I keep thinking. That's the most poetic thing I've seen all day. And this is from my collection, The Parachutist. Which is also currently being reviewed by a couple of presses. So this collection has an epigraph. It says, we have to laugh because laughter, we already know, is the first evidence of freedom, by the Mexican writer Rosario Castellanos. And that's when my manuscript, it sort of takes a surreal, absurd turn. So I'm going to jump into some surreal prose poetry now. My manuscript is divided into linear verse, the first half. My manuscripts, I should say, they all have the same outline. The first half, linear verse, and the second half, prose poetry. So those are my full length. My chapbook is entirely prose poetry. Excuse me. This prose poem is called The Box, and it was published in the Cincinnati Review. A man in a Pink Floyd shirt was stuck in a box. It was a cardboard box. He started punching at the box. Eventually, it gave in. When he jumped out of the box, he realized he was being shipped to England. The man in the Pink Floyd shirt had never been to England, even though he majored in English literature in undergrad. The man began to realize he could finally see some of the sights from the poems he'd read: Tintern Abbey, Big Ben, River Thames, etc. So he got back into the box. He arrived in England in 7 to 10 business days. He walked the streets, admired the fog, listened to the accents. He wrote poems about his visit. On his last day in England, he had a pint of ale and watched a soccer match. At sunset, he got back into the box and returned to California. He loved the box. He loved his life. So when I initially started writing prose poems, I started with a series of prose poems of The Man in the Pink Floyd Shirt. And this next one is called The Guitarist, and it was published in the Journal of Ohio State. The man in a Pink Floyd shirt threw a football toward the top of a skyscraper in downtown Los Angeles. He was trying to prove a point to his girlfriend. He told her he could throw a football as high as a skyscraper. The girlfriend thought he was crazy, but followed him downtown anyway. The man in a Pink Floyd shirt was just trying to impress her. He thought she was the type who would be impressed by a strong arm. After his failed throw, The girlfriend explained to him, "Just be yourself." Then they lived happily ever after. That is, until he lost his job at the rocking chair factory. He worked hard with his hands, building rocking chairs. He wasn't exactly proud of his work, but work is work. The man in a Pink Floyd shirt was fired because he refused to put on his uniform one day. "Take off that Pink Floyd shirt," his boss said. "I refuse," the man in the Pink Floyd shirt said. He was fired right around the holidays. Then his girlfriend broke up with him. He now plays a mean guitar. Rest in peace, man in a Pink Floyd shirt. This next one, another prose poem, was published in Bennington Review. As I said before, one of my favorite journals, and it's called The Centaur. I was ordered to go to hell after I died. When I arrived, I found a large centaur with a shotgun guarding the entrance. "I've been ordered to go to hell," I said. "Yes, license, please," the centaur said. "What license?" I said. "I'm naked." "After you died, didn't you see a Mr. J. Williamson at registration?" the centaur asked. "Yes, he ordered me to come here." "Didn't he give you an ID card and chewing gum?" he said. "No, just chewing gum." "Well, you'll have to go back and get proper identification. There isn't much we can do without that license," he said. "This is very inconvenient and frankly unprofessional," I said. "Next in line," the centaur said. It's a bit odd not being able to hear everybody, but a unique experience nonetheless. Hopefully everybody's still following along. This next prose poem is called The Jaguar. As I enter the garage to lift weights, I hear a vicious roar. To my surprise, I find a turquoise Jaguar sitting on the washer. I drop my water bottle and run back to the kitchen. I retrieve a birthday cake from the fridge and throw it to the Jaguar. It's not the Jaguar's birthday, but it's hungry nonetheless. When the Jaguar finishes the cake, I give it the requisite gifts. 5 gifts in total, none more appreciated than a slingshot. The Jaguar roars for joy, revealing it didn't have a happy childhood. As a result of the gifts and cake, the Jaguar and I build a strong bond that I cherish for many years. When the Jaguar dies of old age, 3 heads of state and 4 archbishops attend the somber funeral. The Jaguar had lived humbly, it lived fully. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today, tonight. 10 more minutes here of reading, then we're going to jump into some questions. This next prose poem is called El Sombrero. El Sombrero. And it was published in Southampton Review. A man fell into the ocean. The water was blue and green. It was the beginning of winter. Luckily, he wore a giant sombrero. He jumped into the sombrero and floated along the shore. The inside of the sombrero was warm and leathered. The clouds spelled out the word ocean. Inevitably, the sombrero landed ashore and the man stepped onto the cool sand. As the moon rose, he sang a ranchera. He was very happy. He walked home beneath the moonlight, but left the sombrero behind. It was ruined from the water, but it had saved his life. We actually had a lot of sunshine last week, and now this week it's pretty cold. So probably like the weather you all are used to over there, but I know I'm going to bring a couple sweaters next month to Seattle. Looking forward to visiting. This next prose poem, again, was published in Bennington Review. It's called The Man and the Antlers. And from what I saw on YouTube, it was read at convocation at Bennington College a couple years ago, maybe a few years ago. The Man and the Antlers. A man picked wild berries in the forest, ate them, and suddenly grew antlers. He was shocked. He ran around in circles. Why? Why? Then he saw a small creek. He looked into the water. He saw his antlers in the reflection, strong and sharp. Why me? He said. Why me? Then a bear approached him. He was startled for a moment, but then charged at the bear with force. Let me see. Yeah, this is, again, another prose poem from my manuscript, The Parachutist, and it's called The Man in the Leaves. A man chased leaves down an urban street. The leaves moved fast. He ran and ran. A young boy stopped him. Sir, why are you chasing leaves? I'm a starving artist. I haven't eaten in days, the man said. Have some oatmeal cookies, the boy said. I only eat leaves, the man said, running down the street. I only eat leaves. It's actually one of my first prose poems I ever wrote, written in the first year that I started writing prose poems. Now this next prose poem is called The Fire Eater, which is also the title of my chapbook of prose poems. And the true story behind this is that a few years ago, I asked my mother, who is, my biggest fan, but also my biggest critic, definitely very loving Mexican mother, but also can be very critical and demanding. And I asked her one time, after I won an NEA fellowship, if she thought I would make it as a writer, and she said no. And instead of writing a whiny poem about my mother doesn't love my poetry, I wrote The Fire Eater. So I sometimes mention this to writers and students so that you can see that you can use a symbol or metaphor to write about things that maybe you don't want to talk about directly, but through metaphor, through elongated metaphor and symbolism and imagery, you can achieve some of those, you can explore some of those things that you would otherwise maybe not talk about. The Fire Eater. A fire eater performed his tricks on Hollywood Boulevard by the entrance to the 101 freeway. It was autumn. Just as he was about to inhale the bright flame, however, he slipped on a leaf and fell into the street. A motorcycle swerved out of the way and barely missed him. The fire eater quickly got up and jumped back onto the curb. He counted his lucky stars. 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars. But there was no reason to go on. At least he felt that way at the moment. His family of circus performers had abandoned him. He would have to make it on his own. Perhaps he could go back to school. Who was he kidding? Eating fire was his only skill. It wasn't much of a marketable skill either. Maybe he could make it on America's Got Talent or get hired in a Vegas show. These were his hopes and dreams. Or were they merely pipe dreams? For now, at least, he would have to be content with eating fire on Hollywood Boulevard by the 101 freeway. Maybe someone important would discover him there tomorrow. Maybe the flame would no longer scar his autumnal heart. I should say that I don't want to like villainize my mother. My mother is my favorite person in the world. And it's just, she grew up rough since she was a kid, helping out with the chores, didn't get a chance to go to school, working in the fields, twisting the necks off of chickens to cook them for their siblings. So when her son wanted to be a poet, I think it was probably rather shocking, to say the least. But she's come to accept it, and as I said, is also one of my biggest fans. A couple more here. This next prose poem is called The Dragon and the Coyote, and it was published as Poem of the Week for Missouri Review. A man looked into a mirror, but he didn't recognize himself. Instead, he saw a dragon and a coyote engaged in a game of chess. The dragon moved first, middle pawn, 2 spaces. Then the coyote parroted the move. They stared into each other's eyes. Neither budged. After 3 hours, they called it a draw. The dragon flapped its scarlet wings and flew toward a nearby mountain. The coyote began to howl a lullaby. When the man eventually stopped looking into the mirror, he realized that he's the dragon and he's the coyote. It's always been that way. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. As I said, I couldn't be more honored, and just a dream come true to read here. Thank you to Julian, everybody at WSU. We will continue to beat you at football, but you will put up a valiant effort. No, I'm kidding. I know every time we go to Washington State, it's always like an L for USC, no matter what. I think this year, was it an L? I don't know. I just remember that we were like almost undefeated and we were going to WSU. I think we lost at Utah this year, but usually when we go to WSU, it's like, and I don't get it. We have all the talent. We have 5 stars and you guys are just tough, and I admire that. This next prose poem is called The Tattoo of Moctezuma. A man got a tattoo of Moctezuma, the last fully independent ruler of the Aztec Empire. In the tattoo artwork, Moctezuma has on an elaborate headdress with golden covering and iridescent green quetzal feathers. He also has a shield in the tattoo for a battle he can't win. Moctezuma has a lengthy, strong spear. The skin of Moctezuma is dark brown, like the man's skin color. The man gets the tattoo on his forearm to show strength. On the other forearm, he has a tattoo of Hernán Cortés with the sword to show symmetry. So that's my time. I thank you once again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Julian, for the invite. And I think we're going to get into the Q&A section.
Yes, Jose, cuts you out, yo. Thank you so much. I also wanted to remember to thank Maya for her reading our land acknowledgement and to remind Oikalo, everyone, that land acknowledgements are just one step toward honoring Indigenous peoples' long presence on all U.S. land and recognize our continuing connection to the earth, water, air, and to our anaconma, our ancestors. This concept actually leads me to our first question. How do your poems bring you close or bring to life your ancestors and your relationship with them, and in what ways?
Yeah, I think that, living in a modern world, growing up Mexican American, especially in Northern Orange County, where I started my life and growing up for the first 14 years of my life. You don't really think about necessarily a lot of those things being Mexican. You just want to watch the local sports teams and that was my life growing up, was just playing basketball all day, going outside, playing with my friends, playing with a bunch of older kids basketball, and playing football, as I mentioned. In the school systems back then, we were reading predominantly, Anglo canon, white male writers, etc. And it wasn't until I started visiting the public libraries that I discovered poets of color, Octavio Paz, and Alurista, the Chicano poet, Luis Rodriguez, Lorna D. Cervantes, Alfred Arciega, who's from Whittier, actually, where I'm currently reading from. And he was my professor at UC Berkeley as well. So I think poetry is a way to acknowledge ancestry. And I try to do it from a realist lens as well. If I paint a portrait of a family member, maybe we're not perfect either, we're human. And I just try to highlight everyday moments, images, and to remember, because it's easy to forget. It's easy to just go with the flow, the status quo. And I think that poetry, literature, painting, art, it's a way to venerate and remember and pass along history, culture. And that's the way that I approach it.
Yes, Katsiao, yeah, thank you. This next question is from Kate G. Are all your poems based on your own life experiences? And this half is mine from another question. And is there anything that you don't want to write about?
Well, I think anytime you say is everything based on this, it's probably a no, right? But a lot of my linear verse is about my real life, and I don't necessarily mix in a lot of surrealism into my linear verse. It tends to be about my life growing up, first gen Mexican American, working class. So that tends to be about my real life. And then a lot of my surreal prose poetry, the absurdist prose poetry, is just a mixture of things. Some of it real, some of it creative. And so there's not really a one answer to that question. It just depends on each poem. You would have to ask me about each individual poem. But sometimes it's inspired by real events, sometimes real events, sometimes I've never actually encountered dragons, but I write about them. So, yeah.
Yes, that's so funny that you say that, because the next question is from Cassidy Heath. I would love to know the purpose of the repetition of the line about the dragon. Is the dragon a metaphor for something?
It can be, right? Dragons are thought to be strong and dominant, and the coyote is thought to be like weaker and trickster and elusive. And so when he's playing chess with himself in the mirror and he sees these two masculine and cowardly figures, it's like the idea that we can be both. We don't have to be macho men. We can be an array of different characteristics and feelings, and we don't have to always be perfect. And so I think it's just a way to describe a layered consciousness through metaphor and imagery.
I love that you say layered consciousness. That That's so just awesome. It's an awesome concept to really, I want to say, like, meditate on. So we've been reading a book by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, and have really been reflecting on like creation stories and how they are in turn kind of, reflected in us in multiple nuanced ways. In what ways do these stories still shape you and your writing? And how does this also help inform your writing?
You're talking about creation stories specifically?
Yeah, like, or just like your creation story.
Well, with me, a lot of my writing, I noticed it goes back to childhood, innocence of childhood. A lot of it goes back to family, the sacrifice of, when you're first generation, your parents came from another country. My parents came from Mexico. So a lot of that is a way for me to honor them, for what they've done for me, the sacrifice. And it's nice to go to Berkeley and get an NEA fellowship and get these books, but what does it say in my dedication of my first book from my parents? You can't forget that as a first gen artist or writer. So I think I'm always going back to origins and I just started going over the cover for my next book, and it's a painting from one of my friends that I grew up with who passed away, and it's just like going back to that. And I always thought it would be a great idea to have a cover of one of his paintings. So I'm in the process of doing all that. But yeah, I think it's always important to go back to origins and not forget where you came from ever, and the people. And I think of some of my elementary school teachers. Mrs. Cranford is she's probably like in 3 of my poems. Mrs. Weir, I've written an ode to her. So it's good to remember the people who have helped get you where you are. And to me, that's always in the back of my mind. And in terms of, I wouldn't be able to write these books without these teachers I had. My sister was also, my older sister was an English teacher, and she was the first teacher of color, English teacher that I saw that was not white, and she came to substitute at my school when I was in high school. So yeah, origins and it's always important to remember and to acknowledge and to pay tribute to those before us.
Yes, I love that. Always stay true to your roots. I always tell my students, you can take this res girl off the res, but you can't take the res out of the girl.
Sure.
Which brings me to my next question. Stephen Short, number 9, must be his tag name. Stephen Short 9. Jose, have you written poems only in Spanish?
No, I have not. I'm not really that skilled to write poems. It's not easy to write poems to begin with, much less in a language that I'm not masterful in. You know what I mean? So I don't even know how I would begin to do that. My Spanish, my folks were not formally trained in Spanish. I mix it in every now and then, when I can. But I'm trying to read more Spanish. And when I go to Mexico, it's easier because you don't have the crutch of leaning on English. You have to speak Spanish. So maybe then, if I was there for like a year or two, I could start writing in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, I mean, I've never taken a Spanish class. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think people think that all Mexican Americans speak Spanish. Or can write it fluently. A lot of us speak it, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have training, especially to write in Spanish, which is not easy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. Um, my writing group and I actually had some of our Nimi Putempt poems, Nez Perce language poems translated to Spanish. And it was beautiful. Like I loved it so much. And it really like, showed me how even if we only know a little bit of our language, like I consider myself a baby learner, Nimi Putempt learner. Like I'm just a baby. I can say, hi, my name is Julian. Thank you for coming here today, just like a baby, like a 1 or 2 year old.
Yeah.
That's me in my language. But our indigenous or our first language, our languages, even if we know a little tiny bit, are so important to who we are as people. I would kind of like to know, how does your Spanish influence your own writing versus how English kind of influences it? And why is this weaving of Spanish and English, right, so important in your own poetic form?
Well, I think there's nostalgia to it, right? And the culture it represents, and it comes down to it. Spanish is colonial as well, right? And I don't look like a Spaniard, right? I look predominantly indigenous, Tarascan, Purepecha, where that's the culture that was dominated by the Spaniards. So a lot of times people tell me you need to speak Spanish, and I'm like, actually, my indigenous language is probably what I should be speaking, but that has also been stolen from me and from us. But yeah, Spanish, it does represent, a lot of Mexican American culture. And so that's what I get out of it when I mix it in. Um, I do sometimes wish I could incorporate more indigenous languages as well, but like I said, that has been stripped away from us.
Hmm.
Even though there are obviously, if you go over there, there's still a lot of the languages are still thriving. But so it's a bit of a mixed bag, just my experience, and Spanish can be nostalgia. It can be a way to feel empowered and to represent for your culture. Um, and it's just a beautiful language. Like you were talking about translating into Spanish. I had some poems translated recently from my friend in Michoacan. And when she sent them to me, I read them, and it was just so beautiful. Like the language is lyrical and it flows well, and next time I'll read one because I can read it. It's just writing is a whole different ballgame. You know what I mean? I don't even think I could write like an essay in Spanish. You know what I mean? Like, but reading
Yes,
it,
I
I could do that.
do.
Yeah, like I could do it if I just started studying that nonstop. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like for a while, for one time, for a few months, I read nothing but Octavio Paz and all his works. And like, I think at that point, I was like starting to write a little bit, but it was just like flowing with the reading, like incantation, as opposed to like me consciously like being fully aware. It was just like in the spirit of it. But yeah, it's a beautiful language. It is colonial. English is colonial. So something to be aware of.
Yes, I do. I love to yell at my students in my language. Just just like one word, I'll be like, "Oh, lamates," when they, when they do something. I'm just, of course, just joking around with them. But I like that part of, for me, it's those decolonial methodologies in education, right?
Yeah.
That students crave. My students do anyway. They're like, oh, you know what I mean? Right. Every time I yell at them, they love it so much.
Yeah.
We have another question from Asha Smith. Her question is, as a person of color, what is the one piece of advice you would give to a person that wants to get their poems published?
As a person of color, I think read poets of color. That will help empower you. Maybe they'll write about some relatable things. Um, when I started reading more Mexican American Chicano writers, I started to see more of the imagery in my neighborhood. Um, so maybe that will inspire you to write. And definitely reading is the most essential part to writing good poetry. It's an art. There's a lot of sophistication in the line breaks and in the imagery, the symbolism. So once you read a heavy dose of poetry, you can start writing your own and paying attention to a lot of the techniques, the cultural references, and you'll feel empowered when you see folks who look like you being published and winning awards. And Natalie Diaz, who I mentioned, was just on here a couple of years ago, and she won the Pulitzer Prize. And you know, it's just taken many years of people, you know, being neglected and predominantly white authors publishing and winning awards, and starting to change a little bit now. So that would be the first thing, I think, is read writers who look like you. And I think that will give you confidence and sense of feeling empowered.
I completely agree with you. I can still remember the first time that I actually read a book that reflected me as a person, as an Nimipu person, right? As an Nimipu woman, was The Beadworkers by Beth Piatote. She's also in my writing group. She's so amazing. She's also a professor at Berkeley. And I remember seeing, you know, Nimipu Timt in the titles of the what was it, of the index or the glossary, whatever, the table of contents. There we go. I swear I'm a writer. Whatever that thing's called. The
Always mix those up too.
I promise I do right. No. All my validity just went out the window. I don't know what a table of contents is. But I remember seeing Nimipu Timt and thinking, wow, this book is me. This book is about me. This book is about my language. And I actually started at that point writing, trying to write. Thank gosh, I have my mentors that look over my terrible Nimipu Timt and correct it for me, you know, phonetically and grammatically. I started writing more poems in Nimipu Timt, so that it's so inspiring, right? Our next question is also about, you know, about writing and writing poetry. It's from Cynthia. Have you ever changed your mind about writing a poem? For example, after you publish your poems, did you realize that you might have added something else or wanted to change something from a poem?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe something technical, like change a word here and there, but I don't think so. I think everything that I submitted was ready to go, and I'm a bit obsessive when it comes to things like that. I work as an editor myself, but I did write a couple poems about my brothers and growing up in gangs and things like that I knew was like touchy subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
But first of all, my brothers don't read my poems. And so I was just like, they're not going to care either way. And also, I had to grow up with that myself, you know, and I remember one time something was going to happen after school with my brothers and some of their friends, and there were supposed to be weapons, and I was just like 15 years old, 16 years old, you know, and just like, oh, my brother's gonna get killed today after school, you know, and so, you know, there's some trauma there and things like that. So I felt I had to write about it to make peace with it myself, and so there were things that were like touchy, and you know, my brothers are not like that anymore necessarily. So it was just difficult things to talk about through poetry, but it felt empowering to sort of try to make sense of all that and come to peace with it, I think.
Yes, I love that. And I had a first year poetry student last semester that had never written poetry ever. They're like, well, what do we write about? I'm like, well, you write about your life. Poetry is life. And I had a few sections that were titled that, like, these poems are literally poetry as life. I think I had one by you. I had one, a couple by Natalie Diaz. And like, for me, that it is like poetry, and reading poetry, by people of color is life. It's existence. It's, in a way, it's survival. So we have a question by Gabriel Davis. What is your favorite gas station go-to drink? And if that's too easy, he's a jokester, this guy. If
Yes.
that's too easy a question, then what is your favorite poem that you've ever read?
Oh, wow. I have to think about that second one. My favorite drink period is iced coffee, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah, iced coffee. And green tea. I like green tea a lot at nighttime. My favorite poem of all time. That's, you can't ask a poet that. I mean, I don't know. There's
We
so
went
many,
from super easy to like the hardest question ever. Thanks, Gabe.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. No, I can't. I can't narrow it down. I have favorite poets: Alberto Rios, Ada Limon, James Tate, Octavio Paz, Harriet Mullen, Diane Seuss. Those are my favorite.
Mm,
And there's so many that are Victoria Chang.
mm.
There's so many that are great nowadays. So, and in the past as well.
I love that. Like, people always ask me that too, just as a teacher of literature, like, what's your favorite book? I'm like, favorite book? I can't narrow it down to just one book. I can give you top five at the least. Top five
Yeah,
at
exactly.
it's so hard to choose. I couldn't really rank those,
And also, like, we go through different stages in life where at one point this poem meant so much in the initial stages, whether it's, Aluristas, Floricanto and Atzlan, or, another poem meant so much at another point when it was Ada Limon, and the simplicity and grace and the sophisticated line breaks. And so at a certain, you go through different stages of interest and aesthetics and so yeah, that's an impossible question.
It really is, which for some of my students yesterday, actually, this was a really hard question for some of them to ask, because I feel like, going back to our creation story, when we're literal, I was asked, like, what do you want to be? What do you wish to be, when we're older? And so again, I like to use my language. Sometimes I use language phrases to kind of get my students' brains working. So I want to do the same with you, Jose. So I use a Nimiputim phrase that says, "Itu witset to patswetsa." What do you wish to be, basically, when you grow up? And, like you said, we're changing all the time. So as an adult, Itu witset to patswetsa. What do you wish to be, Jose?
I want to be exactly what I am: a writer, a teacher, an editor for the rest of my life, and just keep, exploring, discovering, advancing in my field. And I'd like to publish many books. I don't think I necessarily need to go fiction like a lot of poets do. I just want to keep writing poetry, prose poetry, and yeah, I have The Fire Reader, Bad Mexican, Bad American, The Lighthouse Tattoo, The Parachutist, Portrait of the Artist as a Brown Man. So I feel like I've done all the creative things that I wanted to do. Now, as a man, I want to explore other things, and not just the writing, but like, start a family and things like that, that I've been so focused on the writing, and that I want to start branching out in other directions as well.
Oh, I love that answer so much, Jose. Well, we're almost time. So if there's no more questions from the chat, in conclusion, Our cultural knowledge is an understanding of what it means to be a member of a particular culture. This includes particular traditions, issues, and ways of being and knowing that make an individual a member of a community. Knowledge of survival includes an understanding of how and in what ways change can be accomplished, and the ability and willingness to change, adapt, adjust in order to move forward for our communities. Finally, academic knowledge is acquired from educational institutions and our ancestors in and outside of our regular communities. Because the blending of knowledges, academic and cultural ones, it is here in writing our personal truths, in writing and creating poetry, story about who we are as people, poetry as life. We in turn continue to create multiple knowledges and futurities that are key to all of our existences, our survival. Eitnen witset, or I should say, Eitnen was ask papainkina. I am happy that you are all here today. Katiao yao oikalo. Thank you, everyone, for being with us here to share in the art of the poem. And thank you, Jose, for gracing us with your surreal presence, your ancestors, and most of all, your poetry. Go Cougs! Thank you.
Thank you so much.